Get this vagrant out of my building. Major Vivian Harrell's voice cut through the fluorescent hum of the JAG Corps corridor like a blade through paper, sharp and absolute. The kind of voice that had never once been ignored in 41 years of living. She stood in the doorway of Courtroom 3, her dress uniform pressed to geometric perfection, watching two military police officers struggle with a man who looked like he had crawled out of a drainage ditch and somehow wandered into the most secure legal facility at Fort Belvoir. The man was perhaps 60 years old, though the years had not been kind enough to make that estimate reliable. His face was gaunt, weathered by elements that most people only experience through car windows, and a gray beard covered his jaw in a growth that was somehow both unkempt and precisely trimmed at the edges. He wore an army surplus jacket 3 sizes too large, held together at the seams with safety pins that caught the harsh overhead lights, and his boots were wrapped in duct tape that had been applied with an almost surgical precision. Private First Class Damien Cho had the man's left arm twisted behind his back, and his partner had the right, and still the vagrant was not resisting so much as simply refusing to move in the direction they wanted him to go. "I have information," the man said, and his voice was so quiet that Harrell almost missed it beneath the echo of boots on marble. His words came out rough, hoarse from disuse, but there was something underneath that roughness that made her pause for half a second before dismissing it. "Information about Operation Crimson Veil." Harrell's expression flickered, just for a moment, before her courtroom composure locked back into place. She stepped closer, heels clicking against the polished floor, and examined the man the way she might examine a piece of evidence she had already decided was inadmissible. "Operation Crimson Veil is a classified military matter currently under judicial review," she said, her voice dropping to a register meant to intimidate. "And you're trespassing on federal property. Remove him." The MPs began dragging the man backward, and Harrell turned to re-enter the courtroom, where Colonel Theodore Ashworth sat awaiting judgment, where her airtight case was about to deliver another conviction to her perfect record. She had not lost a case in 11 years. She did not intend to start today. But the man spoke again, louder this time, loud enough that his voice carried down the corridor and into the gallery, where witnesses and family members sat waiting for the recess to end. "7 men went into Syria that night," he said. "I know because I was one of them." Harrell stopped. She did not turn around, but she stopped, and in that stopping, everyone else in the corridor stopped too. The MPs. The young lieutenant who had been walking past with a stack of files. The court reporter who had stepped out for coffee and now stood frozen with a paper cup halfway to her lips. According to Army records, Harrell said slowly, still facing the courtroom doors, all 7 members of that ground team were killed in action. The man's response was barely above a whisper, but in the sudden silence of that corridor, it carried like a shout. "According to records, ma'am, I died of complications 2 months after extraction. Those records are false. I am standing here. I would say that is proof enough." Command Sergeant Major Delphine Rousseau had been watching from the courtroom doorway, her position as security NCO giving her a clear view of the entire scene. She was 52 years old, had served 29 years, including a stint as Special Forces support at FOB Chapman, and she had learned to read people the way others read books. Something about this homeless man was wrong. Not wrong as in false, but wrong as in unexpected, as in a piece that did not fit the puzzle everyone assumed they were looking at. She watched the way he stood despite being restrained, weight balanced, shoulders back, even as the MPs pulled at his arms. She watched the way his eyes moved, tracking the corridor exits, cataloging positions, calculating distances. She had seen that look before. She had seen it in men who had spent years training their bodies to react before their minds caught up. If you're watching this story from anywhere in the world, we would love to know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below telling us your city or country. And if stories like this one about courage, sacrifice, and hidden truth speak to you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more incredible true stories that honor those who have been forgotten by the very institutions they served. Now, let us continue. Major Harrell finally turned around. She walked toward the vagrant with measured steps, stopping close enough that she could smell the street on him, the particular mixture of sweat and exhaust and sleepless nights that clung to men who had nowhere else to go. "Do you have any idea," she said quietly, "what the penalty is for interfering with a military tribunal? For making false claims about classified operations?" The man met her eyes. He did not flinch. He did not look away. And somewhere in the depths of those eyes, Harold saw something that made her stomach tighten in a way she did not understand. "I am not here to interfere," he said. "I am here because an innocent man is about to be convicted for saving my life." Harold's lip curled. "Take him a holding," she ordered. "Process him for trespassing, and keep him away from my courtroom." The MPs began moving again, dragging the man toward the security station, his duct-tape boots leaving scuff marks on marble that had been polished that very morning. Rousseau watched him go, and as he passed her position, his sleeve rode up just slightly, revealing the edge of something dark against weathered skin. A tattoo, faded but unmistakable, the arrowhead of Army Special Forces. But what Major Harold did not know, what no one in that building could possibly have known, was that in exactly 47 minutes, that homeless man would hold the entire courtroom in absolute silence, and everything they thought they knew about Operation Crimson Veil would shatter like glass against stone. The holding room was 8 feet by 10 feet of concrete and fluorescent disappointment, a metal bench bolted to the wall, a camera in the corner with its red light blinking in steady rhythm, and nothing else. They had cut the zip ties from his wrists before shoving him inside, a small mercy that meant nothing in the larger architecture of his situation. Elias Cordero sat on that metal bench and did not move. He had not moved in 20 minutes. His breathing was slow and measured, 4 counts in, 4 counts out, the way he had learned to breathe in situations where panic meant death. The camera watched him. He did not watch it back. There was nothing to be gained from acknowledging surveillance. There was nothing to be gained from movement when movement served no purpose. His mind, however, would not be still. It drifted backward the way it always did when he had nothing to anchor it to the present, sliding through years like water through cracks in stone, finding its way inevitably to the place it always found. October 2019. Syria. The night everything ended, and somehow, impossibly, he did not. Master Sergeant Elias Cordero. Call sign Spectre. 18-year Special Forces, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Syria, more classified operations than he could count on both hands. He had been good at his job. He had been so good that they whispered his name at training facilities, told stories about the operator who moved through hostile territory like smoke through air, who completed missions that should have been impossible and made them look routine. Raymond Okonkwo had been his brother in everything except blood. Point man on every mission, the one Cordero trusted with his life and the lives of everyone under his command. Raymond had a laugh that could fill a room and a steadiness under fire that made other operators look like nervous recruits. He talked constantly about his sister Adiz, showed pictures of her nursing school graduation to anyone who would look, planned to visit her in Chicago the moment they rotated stateside. Raymond never made it stateside. Operation Crimson Veil was supposed to be straightforward. Insert 7 Green Berets to extract a CIA asset embedded with a Taliban-affiliated cell operating in eastern Syria. Intelligence indicated minimal resistance. Intelligence was wrong. They walked into an ambush at 0247 local time. The first RPG came from a building they had cleared twice. Cordero remembered the sound of it, that distinctive whistle roar that meant someone was about to die, and then the world became fire and screaming and the particular chaos that only combat could create. 3 men down in the first 90 seconds. Hernandez, Volkov, Kimu, gone before Cordero could even process what was happening. He found Raymond behind a collapsed wall, dragging himself toward cover with his legs, not working the way legs were supposed to work. Cordero grabbed him, pulled him to safety, pressed his hands against the wound in Raymond's abdomen while bullets cracked the air around them. Raymond's blood was hot against his palms. So much blood. Too much blood. "Hold on," Cordero had said, or maybe screamed. He could not remember which. "Extraction is coming. Just hold on." But Raymond knew. Raymond always knew. He had that steadiness even now, even with his life pouring out between Cordero's fingers. Not your fault, Raymond said. His voice was calm, impossibly calm. Intel was bad. Not your fault. Never your fault. He died in 90 seconds. Cordero counted every one of them because he could not stop counting, could not stop hoping that if he just kept pressure on the wound, if he just held on long enough, somehow the universe would change its mind. It did not. The next 72 hours blurred together in Cordero's memory, a smear of movement and pain and desperate survival. He fought when he had to. He hid when he could. He watched the remaining members of his team fall one by one. Anderson at hour 12, catching a round through the throat while covering Cordero's movement. Petrov at hour 23, stepping on an IED that should not have been there. The others in the hours that followed, until Cordero was alone on a mountainside with 47 pieces of shrapnel in his body and the absolute certainty that he would die before sunrise. He remembered crawling. He remembered the taste of blood and dirt. He remembered talking to Raymond, apologizing over and over to a man who could no longer hear him. And then he remembered the helicopter. It came from nowhere, flying low and fast with no lights, a shadow against the darker shadow of the Syrian night. Cordero thought he was hallucinating. He thought death had finally come for him in a form his dying brain could accept. But the helicopter landed, and a man jumped out before the skids even touched ground, running toward Cordero with the kind of speed that only desperation could produce. Cordero could not see his face through the blood in his eyes. He could not process the words the man was saying. But he remembered the arms that lifted him, the shoulder he leaned against, the voice that kept repeating, "You are not dying today. Not on my watch. You are not dying today." 2 kilometers. The man carried him 2 kilometers through hostile territory while enemy fire cracked around them. Cordero drifted in and out of consciousness, certain each time he opened his eyes that he would find himself alone again, that the rescue was just another trick his mind was playing. But it was not a trick. He woke up in Landstuhl Regional Medical Center 14 days later, his body held together with surgical wire and stubborn refusal to quit. The doctors told him he was lucky. The doctors told him someone had saved his life. The doctors could not tell him who. Cordero spent 14 months in recovery. Physical therapy, psychological evaluation, endless forms and interviews, and people asking him to relive the worst night of his life over and over again. They gave him a medical discharge and a handshake and pointed him toward the VA. He never made it to the VA. The nightmares came every night. Raymond's face, Raymond's voice, the feeling of blood between his fingers. Cordero could not sleep without seeing it. He could not wake without feeling it. The VA wanted to help, but Cordero could not accept help. Not when Raymond was dead. Not when 6 men had died under his command. Not when he was the only one who walked away. He did not deserve help. He did not deserve comfort. He did not deserve to survive. So he disappeared. 6 years on the streets. Not because the system failed him, but because he ran from every hand the system extended. Shelters offered beds. He slept under bridges. Programs offered counseling. He talked only to Raymond, whispering to a dead man in the dark hours before dawn. But now he sat in a military holding room, and somewhere in this building, a colonel named Theodore Ashworth was being condemned for what happened that night. And Cordero knew the truth. He whispered it now, his voice barely audible beneath the hum of fluorescent lights. "Still here, brother. Still trying. They are about to punish an innocent man for saving me. I cannot let that happen. I will not let that happen." The camera watched him. He did not watch it back. But for the first time in 6 years, Elias Cordero had a mission, and he intended to complete it. The courtroom doors swung open at precisely 1,400 hours, and the gallery rose as General Marcus Thorne entered with the weight of 32 years of military service pressing down on his shoulders. He took his place at the center of the elevated tribunal bench, flanked by 2 colonels whose faces carried the particular exhaustion of men who had spent 3 days listening to testimony about dead soldiers and failed operations. All rise for the resumption of proceedings in the matter of the United States versus Colonel Theodore Ashworth, the bailiff announced, his voice echoing off dark wood paneling that seemed to absorb what little warmth the fluorescent lights provided. Colonel Theodore Ashworth sat at the defense table with his spine straight and his face revealing nothing. He was 54 years old, gray at the temples, with the kind of stillness that came from decades of making decisions that sent men into harm's way. His dress uniform was immaculate. His hands were folded on the table before him. He had not spoken in his own defense for the entire trial, and he did not appear inclined to start now. Beside him, Captain Renata Volkov shuffled papers with the nervous energy of a young attorney who knew she was losing. She had been assigned to this case 6 weeks ago, fresh from JAG school, and every day since had taught her new ways to feel inadequate. The evidence against her client was circumstantial but damning. The witnesses were credible. The prosecution was Major Vivian Harrell, who had not lost a case in 11 years and who approached this trial with the particular hunger of someone who smelled blood in the water. Major Harrell rose from the prosecution table, smoothing her uniform jacket with practiced efficiency. The prosecution calls Sergeant Major Curtis Bledsoe, she announced. A man in his late 40s approached the witness stand, his gait carrying the slight hitch of someone who had spent too many hours in helicopter crew harnesses. He was sworn in, stated his name and rank for the record, and settled into the chair with the uncomfortable posture of a man who did not want to be there, but understood he had no choice. Sergeant Major Bledsoe, Harrell began, pacing slowly before the witness stand. You served as crew chief on the extraction helicopter during Operation Crimson Veil. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. Can you describe for the tribunal what happened on the night of October 14th, 2019? Bledsoe's jaw tightened. He stared at a point somewhere above Harrell's head, and when he spoke, his voice carried the flat effect of someone reciting facts he had repeated too many times. We received orders to extract at 0315 local time. The ground team was still engaged with hostile forces. We were told to pull out anyway. Who gave that order? It came through command channels. I heard it relayed from Colonel Ashworth's position. Harrell paused, letting the words settle over the gallery like dust. And what happened when you extracted? Bledsoe's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. We left, he said. We flew back to base while our people were still fighting. I could hear them on the radio. The gunfire, the screaming, and then silence. His voice cracked on the last word. Someone in the gallery shifted. A woman in the front row, who Volkov knew was the mother of Sergeant First Class Kim, pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. And the ground team? Harrell pressed. 7 men went in. 7 men died. The words fell like stones into still water. Harrell let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, then 10, allowing the gallery to absorb the weight of what had been said. Thank you, Sergeant Major. No further questions. Captain Volkov rose on unsteady legs. She had prepared cross-examination questions, had rehearsed them in her apartment until the words lost meaning. But standing here now, facing a grieving witness and a gallery full of grieving families, the questions felt hollow. Sergeant Major Bledsoe, she began, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. You testified that you heard the extraction order relayed from Colonel Ashworth's position. Did you personally hear Colonel Ashworth give that order? Bledsoe frowned. No, I heard it relayed through command channels. So you cannot confirm that Colonel Ashworth himself issued the order? Major Harrell was on her feet immediately. Objection. The chain of command is clearly documented. The order originated from Colonel Ashworth's authority. General Thorne nodded. Sustained. Move on, Captain. Volkov swallowed. After the extraction, did you have any knowledge of what happened in the operational area? No. We returned to base. I did not learn the details until the after-action report. So there could have been events that occurred after your departure that you are not aware of? Harrell objected again. Speculation. Sustained. Volkov stood there for a moment, feeling the case slipping through her fingers like sand. She had nothing. The evidence pointed to Ashworth ordering a premature extraction that left 7 men to die. The fact that he refused to explain his actions, refused to offer any defense beyond a simple not guilty plea, made her job nearly impossible. No further questions, she said, and sat down feeling the weight of her client's silence like a physical burden. General Thorne called a brief recess. The gallery murmured. Families embraced. Harold organized her notes with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew victory was approaching. At the defense table, Colonel Ashworth remained motionless. Captain Volkov leaned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir," she said, "you have to give me something. Anything. If you do not testify, if you do not explain what happened that night, I cannot save you." Ashworth turned to look at her for the first time since the recess was called. His eyes were tired, carrying the weight of something she could not understand. "Some things, Captain, are more important than my career. What could possibly be more important than your freedom?" Ashworth did not answer. He turned back to face the empty tribunal bench, and Volkov saw something flicker across his face. Not defeat, not resignation, something closer to acceptance, as if he had made peace with a fate he believed he deserved. She did not know that 3 floors below, in a holding room with concrete walls and fluorescent lights, a homeless man was about to change everything. She did not know that the sole survivor of Operation Crimson Veil was alive, breathing, and waiting for his chance to speak. She did not know that in less than 1 hour, the case she thought she was losing would shatter into pieces, and the truth would rise from the wreckage like smoke from ashes. But she was about to find out. The fluorescent light above Cordero's head flickered twice, casting stuttering shadows across the concrete walls. He watched the light without seeing it, his mind somewhere far away, somewhere the camera in the corner could not follow. He was thinking about the compass. It sat in his jacket pocket now, broken and useless, the glass cracked and the needle frozen at a bearing that pointed nowhere. Raymond had carried that compass through 3 deployments, a gift from his father who had served in Vietnam, passed down through generations of Okonkwo men who believed that a soldier should always know which way was home. Raymond used to joke about it. He would pull out that old compass when everyone else was checking GPS coordinates and satellite feeds, and he would say that technology fails, but true north never lies. The other operators would laugh, call him old-fashioned, ask why he bothered carrying extra weight for something a smartphone could do better. Raymond would just smile that steady smile of his and tuck the compass back into his vest. "It does not tell me where I am," he would say. "It tells me who I am. A man who knows where home is, even when home is 10,000 miles away." The compass broke during the ambush. Cordero found it in the rubble after Raymond died, the glass shattered by the same blast that took his best friend's life. He picked it up without thinking, shoved it in his pocket, and did not look at it again until 3 weeks later when he was lying in a hospital bed at Landstuhl, trying to remember why he was still breathing. He had carried it every day since. 6 years of carrying a broken compass that pointed nowhere, because throwing it away would mean admitting that Raymond was truly gone. Private First Class Cho appeared at the holding room window, peering through the reinforced glass with the casual contempt of someone who had processed 100 vagrants and expected nothing different from this one. He shook his head slightly, muttered something Cordero could not hear, and walked away. Cordero did not react. He had learned long ago that reacting to contempt only invited more of it. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. It was laminated, the edges worn soft from years of handling, the colors faded but still clear enough to make out the faces. 7 men standing in front of a mud brick wall somewhere in Afghanistan, grinning at the camera like they owned the world. Hernandez with his ridiculous mustache, Kim flashing a peace sign, Volkov looking annoyed at being photographed, Anderson mid-laugh at something someone had said, Petrov squinting against the sun, Raymond in the center, arm thrown around Cordero's shoulders, that steady smile lighting up his face. Cordero traced each face with his finger, the way he did every night before he slept. Hernandez, "I'm sorry." Kimmel, "I'm sorry." Volkov, "I'm sorry." Anderson, "I am sorry." Petrov, "I'm sorry." Raymond, "I'm so sorry." He did not know why he apologized to them. They were dead. They could not hear him. They could not forgive him, even if forgiveness was something he deserved, which he knew in his bones he did not. But the ritual had become as necessary as breathing, a nightly penance that kept him tethered to something when everything else had fallen away. The door opened. Cordero looked up, expecting another MP, expecting to be processed and released back onto the streets where he belonged. Instead, he saw a young woman in a JAG Corps uniform, captain's bars on her shoulders and exhaustion carved into the lines around her eyes. Captain Renata Volkov stepped into the holding room and closed the door behind her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She studied him with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle she did not understand, her gaze moving from his weathered face to his safety-pinned jacket to the photograph he still held in his hands. "You told Major Harrell you have information about Operation Crimson Veil," she said finally. Cordero slipped the photograph back into his pocket. "I do." She crossed her arms. "I need you to understand something. I am Colonel Ashworth's defense attorney. If you are here to give false testimony, if you're trying to interfere with these proceedings for any reason, I will personally ensure that you are prosecuted to the fullest extent of military law." Cordero met her eyes. He did not blink. "I am not here to give false testimony, Captain. Then what are you here to give?" "The truth." Something in his voice made her pause. She had interviewed dozens of witnesses over the past 6 weeks, had learned to recognize the particular cadence of people who were lying, evading, or simply mistaken. This man's voice carried none of those qualities. It carried something else entirely, something she could not name but could not ignore. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Elias Cordero, Master Sergeant, United States Army Special Forces. Call sign Spectre." Volkov's breath caught. She knew that name. She had read it in the casualty reports, had seen it listed among the 7 men who died on that Syrian mountainside. "That is impossible," she said. "Elias Cordero died of complications at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center 2 months after extraction. I have seen the death certificate." Cordero almost smiled. "Almost? Then you have seen a lie, Captain, because I am sitting here. I am breathing. And I am the only man who survived Operation Crimson Veil." He leaned forward slightly, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I survived because Theodore Ashworth flew back into hostile territory against direct orders. I survived because he jumped out of a helicopter and carried me 2 kilometers through enemy fire. I survived because that man risked everything to save 1 soldier when command had already written us off as acceptable losses." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle into the silence. "Is Colonel Ashworth the man who flew back?" Volkov could not speak. Her throat had closed around something that felt like hope and terror combined. "Because if he is," Cordero continued, "then he is about to be convicted for the very act that saved my life. And I will not let that happen. I cannot let that happen. Not while I'm still breathing." The camera in the corner recorded everything. The red light blinked its steady rhythm. And somewhere above them, in a courtroom filled with grief and accusation, the clock continued to tick toward a revelation that would change everything. Captain Volkov's hands were trembling as she stepped into the corridor outside the holding room. She pressed her back against the wall and forced herself to breathe, to think, to process what she had just heard. Elias Cordero was dead. She had seen the documentation herself, had read the medical reports detailing complications from surgery, cardiac arrest, no resuscitation. The file was stamped and sealed and filed away with the finality that military bureaucracy applied to all things it considered closed. But the man in that holding room was not a ghost. He was flesh and blood and weathered skin and eyes that carried the weight of something she could not begin to understand. And if he was telling the truth, if Elias Cordero had somehow survived, then everything about this case was wrong. She pulled out her phone and began making calls. The first was to the JAG Records Division. She requested immediate verification of the death certificate from Master Sergeant Elias Cordero, serial number provided, date of death listed as December 2019. The clerk on the other end sounded bored until Volkov explained that the supposedly deceased individual was currently sitting in a holding cell at Fort Belvoir. Then the clerk's voice changed, sharpened, and she promised to call back within the hour. The second call was to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. Volkov identified herself, cited the case number, and asked for patient record from October through December 2019. The administrator hesitated, mentioned privacy regulations, mentioned the need for proper authorization. Volkov's voice dropped to a register she did not know she possessed. "This is a matter of military justice," she said. "A colonel is facing court-martial based on events that may have been deliberately falsified. I need those records, and I need them now." The administrator promised to expedite the request. The third call was the hardest. She dialed the number for Colonel Ashworth's temporary holding area, where he was kept during recesses, and asked the guard to put her through. Ashworth's voice came through flat and tired. "Captain, is there something you need?" "Sir," Volkov said, and her voice wavered despite her best efforts to control it. "There is a man in holding who claims to be Elias Cordero. He says he survived Operation Crimson Veil. He says you flew back and carried him out." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that Volkov thought the connection had dropped. "Sir, are you still there?" When Ashworth spoke again, his voice was different. The flatness was gone, replaced by something raw, something broken. "Cordero is alive? He says he is. He has a special forces tattoo. He knows operational details, and he is demanding to testify on your behalf." Another silence. Then, so quietly that Volkov had to press the phone against her ear to hear, "I thought he died. The reports said complications. I thought I failed him. Sir, what happened that night?" "The truth." Ashworth exhaled, a long and shuddering breath that carried 6 years of weight. "The extraction order came from JSOC Command. They wanted the intelligence asset pulled immediately, said the ground team was already lost, acceptable casualties in service of the larger mission. I refused. I commandeered a helicopter and flew back with a pilot named Reyes who was either brave or crazy. I never figured out which. And Cordero? I found him 2 clicks from the ambush site. He was crawling through the dirt, more dead than alive, 47 pieces of shrapnel in his body, and still trying to move. I carried him back to the helicopter while half the Syrian countryside tried to kill us both. Reyes took a round through the shoulder, but kept flying. We made it to the extraction point with maybe 3 minutes of fuel left. Volkov closed her eyes. "Why did you never say this? Why did you let them put you on trial without defending yourself?" "Because the intelligence I recovered during those 72 hours exposed a network that was planning attacks on 3 American embassies. The information saved hundreds of lives, but revealing how I obtained it would compromise assets still in the field. I made a choice, Captain. I chose to protect the living over protecting myself. And the falsified death certificate? Someone wanted Cordero erased from the record." Ashworth's voice hardened. "Someone in command made the wrong call that night. Someone decided that 7 men were acceptable losses. And when I brought back a survivor, when I brought back proof that those men could have been saved, that someone decided to bury the evidence. Cordero's death was convenient. A dead witness cannot testify." Volkov felt sick. This was not just a court-martial. This was a cover-up. Someone high enough in the chain of command to falsify medical records, to fabricate a death certificate, to sacrifice a colonel rather than face accountability. "Sir," she said, "if Cordero testifies, everything comes out. The falsified records, the cover-up, all of it. I know. It could destroy careers. It could go all the way to the top. I know. Are you prepared for that?" Ashworth was quiet for a moment. Then, "Captain, I have spent 6 years believing that Elias Cordero died because I did not reach him fast enough. I have carried that guilt every single day. If he is alive, if he is here, then nothing else matters. Let the truth come out. Let it burn whatever it needs to burn." Volkov ended the call and stood in the corridor, her mind racing through implications and consequences and the terrifying weight of what she was about to do. The courtroom would reconvene in 20 minutes. Major Harrell was preparing her closing arguments, confident in her victory. The tribunal was ready to deliver a verdict that would end Theodore Ashworth's career and send him to military prison. And Volkov had exactly 20 minutes to change everything. She straightened her uniform, squared her shoulders, and walked back toward the holding room where Elias Cordero waited. She did not know if she could win this case. She did not know if the truth would be enough to overcome 6 years of lies and falsified records. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was going to try, because somewhere in that building, a man who had risked everything to save a stranger was about to be condemned for it. And somewhere in a holding cell, a ghost had returned from the dead to set the record straight. All she had to do was given the chance to speak. The holding room door opened for the second time, and Cordero looked up to find Captain Volkov standing in the threshold with a look on her face that he recognized. He had seen that look on the faces of young officers before, the particular mixture of fear and determination that came when someone realized they were about to step into territory from which there was no retreat. "I spoke with Colonel Ashworth," she said. Cordero nodded slowly. "And?" "He confirmed your account. All of it. The unauthorized flight back, carrying you out, the intelligence he recovered. He also told me something else." She stepped into the room and let the door close behind her. "Someone falsified your death certificate, Sergeant Cordero. Someone high enough in command to manipulate medical records at Landstuhl. Someone who wanted you erased from the official account of what happened that night." Cordero's expression did not change. He had suspected as much for years, though he had never cared enough to investigate. What did it matter if the army thought he was dead? He had felt dead. He had wanted to be dead. The falsified paperwork simply made official what he already believed about himself. "Do you know who?" he asked. "Not yet. But if you testify, if the truth comes out, it will trigger an investigation. Careers will end. People will face consequences." "Good." The word came out flat, without emotion, but Volkov heard something underneath it. Not vengeance. Something closer to exhaustion. The particular weariness of a man who had carried a weight for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. "There is something you need to understand," she said. "If I put you on the stand, Major Harrell will cross-examine you. She will attack your credibility. She will use your years on the street, your lack of contact with the military, your mental health, anything she can find to discredit your testimony." Cordero almost smiled. "Captain, I have been called worse by better. I have been spat on by strangers. I have been kicked awake by police officers who did not want me sleeping in their jurisdiction. I have been invisible for 6 years, a ghost that people looked through rather than at. There is nothing Major Harrell can say to me that I have not already said to myself 1,000 times in the dark." Volkov studied him for a long moment. "Why did you come here today? You could have stayed hidden. You could have let this trial play out without ever revealing yourself. Why now?" Cordero reached into his pocket and pulled out the broken compass. He held it in his palm, the cracked glass catching the fluorescent light. "This belonged to my best friend," he said, "Raymond Okonkwo. He died in my arms on that mountainside. His last words were telling me it was not my fault, that the bad intel was not my fault, that I should not blame myself." His thumb traced the frozen needle. "I did not listen. For 6 years, I blamed myself for every man who died that night. I believed I should have seen the ambush coming. I believed I should have moved faster, shot straighter, done something different that would have kept them alive. And when I woke up in that hospital and learned that everyone else was gone, I believed I did not deserve to survive." He looked up at Volkov. "But Colonel Ashworth did not believe that. He flew back into hell to save me when everyone else had given up. He risked his life, his career, everything, because he believed that one soldier was worth saving. And now he is sitting in a courtroom being punished for it." His voice hardened. "I cannot change what happened in Syria. I cannot bring back Raymond or Hernandez or any of the others. But I can do this. I can tell the truth. I can make sure that the man who saved my life does not go to prison for it." He placed the compass back in his pocket. "That is why I am here, Captain. Because for the first time in 6 years, I have something worth living for. I have a chance to do something that matters." Volkov felt something shift in her chest, something that might have been hope, or might have been the weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders. "The court reconvenes in 8 minutes, she said. "I need to file a motion to add you as a witness. General Thorne may not allow it. Harrell will certainly object. Let her object. And if they refuse to let you testify?" Cordero stood. It was a simple movement, just a man rising from a metal bench, but there was something in the way he did it that made Volkov take a step back. His shoulders squared, his spine straightened, his chin lifted. For just a moment, she did not see a homeless man in a torn jacket. She saw the ghost of the soldier he had been, the operator they called Spectre, the man who had survived the unsurvivable. "Then they will have to drag me out of that courtroom," he said. "And I promise you, Captain, that will make a much bigger scene than simply letting me speak." Volkov nodded. She turned toward the door, then paused. "Sergeant Cordero, when you testify, when you tell them what happened, they're going to want proof. Physical evidence. Something more than your word." Cordero began rolling up the left sleeve of his surplus jacket. Beneath the frayed fabric, his forearm was a map of scars and faded ink. The Special Forces arrowhead. The coordinates. The 7 sets of initials with 6 small crosses beside them. "I have been carrying the proof for 6 years," he said. "It is written on my skin. It is carved into my bones. And when I show them, when they see what I have carried, there will be no doubt." Volkov looked at the tattoo, at the scars, at the physical testament of a night that should have killed him. "Then let us go," she said. "Let's show them." She opened the door. Cordero stepped through, and together, they walked toward a courtroom where the truth had been buried for 6 years. It was time to dig it up. The corridor leading to courtroom 3 stretched before them like a gauntlet, polished marble reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. Cordero walked beside Captain Volkov with a gait that had changed in the past hour, steadier now, more purposeful, as if something dormant inside him had finally remembered how to wake. They passed portraits of generals and admirals, men in dress uniforms staring down from gilded frames with expressions of permanent authority. Cordero did not look at them. He had served under men like these, had followed their orders into places that did not appear on any map, had watched friends die because someone in a comfortable office had made a calculation that valued intelligence over lives. He did not hate them for it. War required calculations. War required men who could look at numbers and make decisions that would haunt them for the rest of their days. But war also required truth, and truth was what had been stolen from this place. "Captain Volkov," a voice called from behind them. They stopped, turned. Command Sergeant Major Delphine Rousseau was walking toward them with quick, purposeful strides, her face carrying an expression that Cordero could not quite read. "Sergeant Major," Volkov said. "Is there a problem?" Rousseau stopped in front of them. Her eyes moved to Cordero, studying him with an intensity that made him feel like he was being disassembled and examined piece by piece. "I saw him in the corridor earlier," she said, "when the MPs were dragging him in. Something about him did not sit right with me. So I made some calls." Volkov tensed. "And?" Rousseau reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Volkov without taking her eyes off Cordero. "I served logistics support at FOB Chapman in 2017, she said. "I never met the operators directly, but I heard stories. Everyone heard stories. There was one name that came up more than any other. A Special Forces sergeant who moved through operations like he was made of smoke. They call him Spectre." Cordero said nothing. Rousseau continued. "The story said Spectre completed missions that should have been impossible. Extraction of a CIA asset from a compound in Kandahar with 0 casualties. Reconnaissance deep in Taliban territory that provided intelligence for 3 separate operations. A solo night infiltration that took out an IED manufacturing cell before they could deploy their devices to Kabul." She paused. "The stories also said Spectre died in Syria in 2019. Operation Crimson Veil. Everyone on the ground team killed in action." Cordero met her eyes. "Not everyone." Rousseau nodded slowly. "I pulled your service record 20 minutes ago. What I found does not match what the official reports say. There are gaps, inconsistencies. Someone edited your file after the fact, removed certain details, added others." She gestured to the paper in Volkov's hands. "That is a copy of your original commendation for the Kandahar extraction. Silver Star. The citation describes actions that are not mentioned anywhere in your current official record. Someone tried to erase you, Sergeant. Someone wanted you to disappear." Cordero felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced in years. It took him a moment to recognize it as validation, the feeling of being seen by someone who understood what they were looking at. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Russo's expression hardened. "Because I spent 29 years serving this institution. I believe in military justice. I believe in the chain of command. But I also believe that when that chain is used to bury the truth, when it is used to destroy innocent men and erase heroes, then it is broken. And broken chains need to be fixed." She looked at Volkov. "Captain, I do not know what you are planning. But if you are about to walk into that courtroom and challenge 6 years of official lies, you should know that you are not alone. There are people in this building who remember what really matters. Honor, truth, the men and women who serve." Volkov unfolded the paper and scanned its contents. Her eyes widened slightly as she read the citation, the detailed account of Cordero's actions in Kandahar, the lives saved, the risks taken. "This changes things," she said quietly. "It changes everything," Russo replied. "That man is not a vagrant who wandered in off the street. He is a decorated combat veteran with a service record that would make most officers weep with envy. And someone tried to erase him from existence." She turned to Cordero one final time. "I do not know why you ended up on the streets, Sergeant. I do not know what happened to you after Syria. But I know what you did before. And I know that whatever is about to happen in that courtroom, you have earned the right to speak." Cordero swallowed against something thick in his throat. "Thank you, Sergeant Major." Russo snapped to attention and rendered a salute so crisp it could have cut glass. "It is an honor, Spectre." Cordero hesitated for just a moment. Then, slowly, his body remembering motions it had not performed in 6 years, he returned the salute. Russo held it for 3 seconds before dropping her hand. "Give them hell," she said, and she turned and walked away. Volkov watched her go, then looked at Cordero. "Are you ready?" Cordero lowered his hand. He thought about Raymond. He thought about the compass in his pocket, the photograph, the names etched into his skin. He thought about Colonel Ashworth sitting in that courtroom, waiting to be condemned for an act of courage that should have been celebrated. "I have been ready for 6 years," he said. "I just did not know it until today." Volkov nodded. She folded the commendation paper and slipped it into her pocket. "Then let us go make history." They turned and walked toward the courtroom doors, 2 figures silhouetted against the fluorescent glow, one in a crisp JAG uniform and one in a torn jacket held together with safety pins. The truth was coming, and nothing would ever be the same. The courtroom doors swung open, and every head in the gallery turned. Major Vivian Harrell stood at the prosecution table, her closing argument half formed on her lips, frozen mid-sentence by the sight of Captain Volkov entering with the vagrant from the corridor. The homeless man shuffled beside the young attorney, his duct-taped boots scuffing against the polished floor, his oversized jacket hanging from shoulders that seemed broader now than they had an hour ago. General Thorne leaned forward at the tribunal bench, his brow furrowing. "Captain Volkov," he said, his voice carrying the particular edge of a man whose proceedings had just been interrupted. "Explain yourself." Volkov stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "General, the defense requests permission to call an additional witness." The gallery erupted in murmurs. Harrell was on her feet immediately, her composure cracking for the first time since the trial began. "Objection," she said. "This is highly irregular. No additional witnesses were disclosed during discovery. The defense cannot simply produce witnesses at the 11th hour." General Thorne raised a hand, silencing the room. "Captain Volkov, this court has procedures for a reason. You cannot introduce witnesses without proper notification and vetting. Sir, with respect, this witness only became available during the recess. His testimony is directly material to the charges against Colonel Ashworth. He possesses first-hand knowledge of Operation Crimson Veil that no other living person can provide." The tribunal officers exchanged glances. General Thorne studied the homeless man standing at the back of the courtroom, taking in the torn jacket, the weathered face, the incongruity of his presence in this formal setting. "And who exactly is this witness?" Volkov took a breath. Master Sergeant Elias Cordero, United States Army Special Forces. He is the sole survivor of the ground team deployed during Operation Crimson Veil. The silence that followed was absolute. It pressed against the walls of the courtroom like a physical weight, crushing the air from the lungs of everyone present. Harold recovered first. "That is impossible," she said, her voice sharp. "All 7 members of that ground team were killed in action. Sergeant Cordero died of complications at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center 2 months after the operation. I have seen the death certificate myself." "Then you have seen a falsified document, ma'am." Every eye in the room turned to Cordero. He had not moved from his position near the doors, had not raised his voice, but somehow his words carried through the courtroom with the weight of artillery fire. Harold's face flushed. "General, this is absurd. This man is clearly disturbed. He has been living on the streets. He has no documentation, no credentials. He cannot simply walk into a military tribunal and claim to be a dead soldier." "I have documentation," Cordero said quietly. "I have credentials. They're written on my body in scars and ink, and they tell a story that your falsified records try to bury." Harold turned to face him fully, her eyes blazing. "You expect this court to believe that you survived an operation that killed 6 other men, that you somehow escaped death at a military hospital, and that you have been living as a homeless vagrant for 6 years while a decorated colonel faces court-martial for your supposed rescue? I do not expect anything, ma'am. I'm simply telling you what happened." Harold took a step toward him. "What happened is that Colonel Ashworth ordered a premature extraction that left 7 soldiers to die. What happened is that those soldiers' families have spent 6 years grieving. What happened is that this court is about to deliver justice, and you are interfering with that process." Cordero did not flinch. "What happened," he said, "is that Colonel Ashworth defied a direct order from JSOC Command. He commandeered a helicopter and flew back into hostile territory when everyone else had written us off. He found me 2 kilometers from the ambush site, more dead than alive, and he carried me through enemy fire to extraction. He saved my life, Major, and you're trying to send him to prison for it." The gallery stirred. Someone in the back row stood up, then sat down again. A woman in the front row, the mother of one of the fallen soldiers, pressed her hand against her mouth. General Thorne's voice cut through the tension. "Captain Volkov, you are asking this court to accept testimony from a man who claims to be legally dead. A man with no verifiable identification, no military credentials, no documented connection to these proceedings. On what basis should I allow this?" Volkov stepped forward. "On the basis of justice, sir. On the basis that Colonel Ashworth has refused to defend himself because the truth is classified, because revealing what really happened that night would compromise ongoing intelligence operations. He has chosen to sacrifice his career rather than endanger lives. But Sergeant Cordero has no such constraints. He can testify to what he experienced without revealing classified methods or sources." She pulled the folded paper from her pocket. "And we have documentation, sir." Command Sergeant Major Russo retrieved Sergeant Cordero's original service record, including a Silver Star commendation that was removed from his official file after Operation Crimson Veil. Someone edited his records. Someone falsified his death certificate. Someone wanted him erased. She placed the paper on the tribunal bench. The question is why? And the only way to answer that question is to let him speak. General Thorne looked at the paper. He looked at Cordero. He looked at Colonel Ashworth, who sat motionless at the defense table with tears streaming silently down his face. The colonel had not moved, had not spoken, but his eyes were fixed on Cordero with an expression that contained 6 years of grief and guilt and desperate, impossible hope. General Thorne made his decision. The witness will approach the stand. Major Harrell, you will have full opportunity for cross-examination, but this man will be heard. Harrell opened her mouth to object again, but something in the general's expression stopped her. Cordero began walking toward the witness stand. The gallery watched in silence. His boots left scuff marks on the polished floor. His safety pins caught the light, and with each step, the truth drew closer to the surface. The witness stand felt smaller than Cordero remembered courtrooms being. He settled into the wooden chair, his hands resting on the armrests, his eyes taking in the room with the automatic threat assessment that 18 years of special forces had burned into his nervous system. Exits at 9 and 3 o'clock. Bailiff armed at the door. Tribunal elevated, sightlines clear. Gallery packed. Approximately 40 civilians and military personnel, emotional states ranging from hostile to curious to grief-stricken. The bailiff approached with a Bible. Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. State your name and rank for the record. Cordero's voice came out steady, clearer than it had been in years. Elias Cordero, Master Sergeant, United States Army Special Forces. Retired. The court reporter's fingers paused over a keyboard. She looked up at him, then back down, and resumed typing with hands that trembled slightly. Captain Volkov approached the stand. Sergeant Cordero, can you describe your military service prior to October 2019? Cordero nodded. I enlisted at 17 with parental consent. Basic training at Fort Benning, then airborne school, then ranger assessment. I was selected for Special Forces qualification in 2004. Spent the next 15 years deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and locations I am not permitted to name. I served as Team Sergeant for Operational Detachment Alpha 595 from 2016 until Operation Crimson Veil. And what was your call sign? Spectre. Somewhere in the gallery, someone drew a sharp breath. Cordero did not look to see who. Volkov continued. Sergeant Cordero, in your own words, describe what happened on the night of October 14th, 2019. Cordero closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he was no longer looking at Volkov. He was looking at a point somewhere beyond the courtroom walls, at a place only he could see. We inserted at 0215 local time. He began. 7 operators plus our CIA asset handler. Primary objective was extraction of an intelligence source embedded with a Taliban-affiliated cell operating in eastern Syria. Coordinates 35.9284 degrees north, 38.9962 degrees east. Terrain was mountainous, visibility limited. Intel indicated minimal hostile presence in the area. His voice took on the flat cadence of an after-action report, precise and detailed, and utterly devoid of emotion. Intel was wrong. We walked into a prepared ambush at 0247. They were waiting for us. First contact killed 3 of my men in 90 seconds. Sergeant First Class Daniel Hernandez. Staff Sergeant Victor Volkov. Sergeant First Class Jean-Ho Kim. I watched them die before I could even identify the source of fire. The gallery was silent. The mother in the front row had stopped crying. She was staring at Cordero with an intensity that bordered on desperation, hungry for details about her son's last moments. We fell back to a defensive position approximately 200 meters east. I performed triage on the remaining team members. Sergeant First Class Raymond Okonkwo had sustained shrapnel wounds to the abdomen, penetrating trauma, arterial bleeding. I applied pressure, called for immediate extraction, and watched my best friend die in my arms while command told us to hold position. Cordero's voice cracked on the last word. He paused, swallowed, and continued. Okonkwo's last words were telling me it was not my fault, that the bad intelligence was not my fault. He died at 0259, 90 seconds from first wound to final breath. Captain Volkov's voice was soft. What happened after Sergeant Okonkwo died? We continued fighting. Staff Sergeant Thomas Anderson was killed at hour 12, covering my movement to a secondary position. Sergeant First Class Alexei Petrov stepped on an IED at hour 23. The remaining operator, Corporal Marcus Webb, took a sniper round at hour 31. I was alone after that. He looked directly at General Thorne. For the next 41 hours, I moved through hostile territory with 47 pieces of shrapnel in my body. I rationed ammunition. I treated my own wounds with supplies salvaged from my fallen brothers. I was prepared to die. I expected to die. Every breath I took felt borrowed from men who deserved it more than I did. And then, Cordero's eyes moved to Colonel Ashworth. And then a helicopter appeared. No lights, No radio contact. Just a shadow against the sky that I was certain was a hallucination. I had lost enough blood that I was seeing things, hearing voices, talking to men who were already dead. He paused, but it was not a hallucination. The helicopter landed approximately 50 meters from my position. A man jumped out before the skids touched ground and ran toward me. He grabbed me by the vest and said 5 words that I will never forget. What were those words? Cordero's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You're not dying today." The courtroom was utterly still. That man carried me 2 kilometers through enemy fire. He took rounds that should have killed us both. He loaded me into that helicopter and held pressure on my wounds while a pilot with a bullet in his shoulder flew us to extraction. He saved my life when every protocol, every order, every rational calculation said I was already dead. Cordero raised his hand and pointed directly at the defense table. "That man is Colonel Theodore Ashworth, and you're trying to send him to prison for the greatest act of courage I have ever witnessed." The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10, 15. Then the mother in the front row stood up. "My son," she said, her voice breaking. "Jinho, did he suffer?" Cordero turned to face her. His eyes were wet. "No, ma'am," he said softly. "It was instant. He never knew what hit him. He died a soldier, serving his country, surrounded by brothers who loved him." The woman collapsed back in her seat, sobbing. The man beside her wrapped his arms around her shoulders. And Cordero sat in the witness stand, tears streaming down his weathered face, finally speaking the truth that had been buried for 6 years. Major Harrell rose from the prosecution table. Her face had gone pale during Cordero's testimony, but her voice remained sharp as she approached the witness stand. "Sergeant Cordero," she began, "if that is indeed who you are, you have presented this court with a remarkable story. A miraculous survival, a heroic rescue, a conspiracy to falsify your death. But stories are not evidence." She clasped her hands behind her back. "You claim to have survived Operation Crimson Veil. You claim Colonel Ashworth personally rescued you. Yet you have no documentation, no military identification. You have been living on the streets for 6 years with no contact with the Army, no medical records, no verifiable proof of anything you have said." Cordero watched her pace without expression. "So I must ask," she continued, "why should this tribunal believe the testimony of a homeless man who wandered in off the street? A man who, by his own admission, has been suffering from severe psychological trauma? A man who could easily have constructed this fantasy from publicly available information about Operation Crimson Veil?" Cordero was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. "You want proof. I want evidence." Major Harrell corrected. "This is a court of law. We deal in facts, not feelings." Cordero nodded slowly. He reached for the buttons on his surplus jacket and began unfastening them one by one. The gallery watched in confused silence as he removed the jacket entirely, revealing the threadbare thermal shirt beneath. Holes dotted the collar. The fabric was thin enough to show the outline of his ribs. He rolled up his left sleeve. The tattoo emerged first. The Special Forces arrowhead, faded but unmistakable, the symbol that operators earned through years of training and sacrifice. Beneath it, numbers etched in black ink: 35.9284N, 38.9962E. Beneath that, a date, October 14th, 19. And beneath that, 7 sets of initials arranged in a circle: DH. VV, JK, SOL, DA, OP, MW. 6 of them had small crosses beside them. "These are the coordinates of the ambush site," Cordero said. "These are the initials of every man on my team. The crosses mark the ones who did not come home." He turned his arm to show the scars. They ran from his wrist to his elbow, a landscape of raised tissue and discolored skin that told a story no words could capture. 47 pieces of shrapnel. The surgeons at Landstuhl removed most of them. Some are still in there. I feel them when the weather changes, when it rains, when the temperature drops below 40 degrees. He stood from the witness chair. No one moved to stop him. He pulled his thermal shirt up, revealing his torso. More scars. A surgical line running along his rib cage. a puckered wound on his left side, a pattern of small circular marks across his stomach. "This is where the field surgeon opened me up to stop internal bleeding," he said, tracing the surgical scar. "This is where a round passed through my side. These are the shrapnel entry points that were too deep to remove without risking paralysis. He'll let his shirt fall. You want proof, Major? This body is proof. Every scar is a document. Every mark is a record. 6 years on the streets did not put these on me. Syria did. October 14th, 2019 did. Watching my brothers die, while I could do nothing to save them, did." He stepped out from behind the witness stand and walked toward the prosecution table. Harrell took an involuntary step backward. "You can pull my fingerprints," Cordero said. "They will match Master Sergeant Elias Cordero, serial number 427896253. You can pull my dental records. They will show the field extraction performed at a forward operating base in 2017. You can pull my DNA and match it to samples on file with Army Medical." He stopped directly in front of her, "where you can look into my eyes and see what 6 years of surviving something unsurvivable looks like. Your choice, Major." Harrell opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. General Thorne's voice cut through the silence. "Command Sergeant Major Russo." Russo stepped forward from her position by the door. "Verify the witness's fingerprints against military records." Immediately, Russo nodded. She approached Cordero with a portable scanning device. He extended his hand without being asked. She pressed his fingers to the scanner, and the room waited in suffocating silence while the device processed. The beep was soft, almost inaudible, but everyone heard it. Russo's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. "Positive match, sir. Master Sergeant Elias Cordero. Serial number 427896253. Status listed as deceased, December 2019. But these are his prints. This is him." The gallery erupted. Voices overlapping, chairs scraping, someone crying out. General Thorne gavelled for order, but the sound was lost in the chaos. At the defense table, Colonel Ashworth had buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with sobs he had held back for 6 years. And Cordero stood in the center of the courtroom, scars exposed, truth finally spoken, a dead man who had refused to stay buried. Harrell's voice was barely a whisper. "No further questions." She walked back to the prosecution table on unsteady legs and sat down heavily. Her case was in ruins. Her certainty was ash. And somewhere in the wreckage of everything she thought she knew, a new truth was taking shape. The truth that had been buried for 6 years. The truth that would change everything. General Thorne gavelled the courtroom to order 3 times before the chaos subsided. His face had aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. The weight of what he had witnessed pressing lines into his forehead that had not been there before. "This tribunal will recess for 2 hours, he announced. "During that time, I am ordering an immediate investigation into the circumstances surrounding Sergeant Cordero's falsified death certificate and altered service records. I'm also ordering a full review of the command decisions made during Operation Crimson Veil." He turned to Colonel Ashworth. "Colonel, you will remain in custody pending the outcome of this investigation. However, given the testimony we have heard today, I am suspending further prosecution until the facts can be properly established." Ashworth rose to his feet. His eyes were red, his face streaked with tears he had not bothered to wipe away. "General," he said, his voice hoarse. "With respect, sir, I would like to speak with Sergeant Cordero. Privately." Thorne considered this for a long moment. "Granted." "Bailiff, arrange a private room for Colonel Ashworth and Sergeant Cordero. Captain Volkov may be present if the sergeant requests." Cordero shook his head slightly. "Just the colonel and me, sir, if that is permitted." Thorne nodded. "This court is in recess." The gallery began to empty, but the movement was slow, reluctant. People lingered, staring at Cordero as if he might disappear if they looked away. The mother of Sergeant Kim, approaching before she left, took his weathered hands in hers and simply held them for a moment. She did not speak. She did not need to. Then she released him and walked away with her husband's arm around her shoulders. The bailiff led Cordero and Ashworth to a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and suddenly they were alone for the first time since a Syrian mountainside 6 years ago. Ashworth stood by the window, his back to Cordero, his shoulders trembling. "I thought you were dead," he said finally. His voice broke on the last word. "The hospital called. They said complications. Cardiac arrest. They said you did not survive." Cordero remained by the door. "Someone wanted it that way," he replied. "Someone decided a dead witness was more convenient than a living one." Ashworth turned. His face was a battlefield of emotions: grief, guilt, relief, anger, all fighting for dominance. "I carried you for 2 kilometers. I felt your heart beating against my back. I told you that you were not dying, and I meant it. I believed it. And then they told me you died anyway, and I thought I had failed you. You did not fail me, sir. I spent 6 years believing I should have gotten there faster. Should have done more. Should have found a way to save all of them, not just one." Cordero crossed the room slowly. He stopped an arm's length from Ashworth. "Colonel, you defied direct orders from JSOC command. You flew a helicopter into hostile territory with a wounded pilot and no backup. You carried a dying man through enemy fire for 2 kilometers. You did everything humanly possible, and then some." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the broken compass. "Raymond Okonkwo gave me this before he died. It belonged to his father and his grandfather before that. He told me it does not tell you where you are. It tells you who you are." He pressed the compass into Ashworth's hands. "For 6 years, I forgot who I was. I lived on the streets. I refused help. I punished myself for surviving when my brothers did not. I thought I did not deserve to live." Cordero's voice steadied. "But you did not think that. You thought one soldier was worth saving. You risked everything because you believed my life had value. And today, I finally understand that you were right." Ashworth stared at the compass in his hands. "I cannot accept this. It is not a gift, sir. It is a promise. I am going to find out who falsified my death certificate. I'm going to find out who gave the order that killed my team. And I'm going to make sure they face justice." He placed his hand on Ashworth's shoulder. "But first, I needed you to know. You did not fail me. You saved me. And now it is my turn to save you." Ashworth looked up. The tears were flowing freely now, but something else was there too. Something that looked like hope. "Elias," he said, using Cordero's first name for the first time. "What happened to you? After the hospital, where did you go?" Cordero was quiet for a moment. "I ran. The nightmares were too much. The guilt was too heavy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Raymond dying. I saw all of them dying. And I could not carry that weight and pretend to be normal at the same time." He withdrew his hand. "So I disappeared. Shelters, underpasses, day labor when I could get it. I told myself I did not deserve anything better. I told myself the best thing I could do was fade away and stop taking up space that should have belonged to better men. And now I know that surviving is not betrayal. Raymond told me that with his last breath, and I did not listen. But I'm listening now." He looked toward the window, toward the gray light filtering through government glass. "I do not know what comes next. I do not know if I can rebuild what I destroyed. But I know I cannot go back to hiding. Not after today. Not after finally speaking the truth." Ashworth gripped the compass tightly. "You will not have to rebuild alone," he said. "I owe you everything. Whatever you need, whatever it takes, I will be there." Cordero almost smiled. The expression felt foreign on his face, muscles remembering movements they had forgotten. "Then let us start by finishing what we came here to do. There is a courtroom full of people waiting for answers. And somewhere in this building, there are men who thought they could bury the truth." He turned toward the door. Time to show them how wrong they were. 3 months later, Elias Cordero stood at the window of a small apartment in Arlington, watching the sun rise over the Potomac. The light painted the water in shades of gold and copper, and for the first time in 6 years, he did not feel the urge to look away from something beautiful. The apartment was sparse. A bed with clean sheets, a table with 2 chairs, a kitchen with a refrigerator that hummed quietly in the corner. It was not much by most standards, but to a man who had slept under bridges and in doorways, it felt like a cathedral. The Veterans Legal Defense Fund had secured the housing after the trial made national news. They had also secured his back benefits, 6 years of disability payments that the Army owed him for wounds sustained in service. They had connected him with doctors who understood combat trauma, therapists who did not flinch when he described the things he had seen and done. He had resisted at first. Old habits, old guilt. But Captain Volkov had refused to let him disappear again, showing up at the shelter where he was staying, bringing paperwork and coffee and a stubbornness that matched his own. "You do not get to save Colonel Ashworth and then throw yourself away," she had told him. "That is not how this works." She was right. He was beginning to understand that she usually was. The investigation triggered by his testimony had moved faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks, Army Criminal Investigation Division had identified the source of the falsified death certificate, a brigadier general named Harrison Wells, who had been deputy commander at JSOC at the time of Operation Crimson Veil. Wells had given the order to abort the rescue mission. Wells had classified the intelligence Ashworth recovered in a way that prevented anyone from questioning the timeline. And when Cordero survived, Wells had arranged for his death to be documented anyway, erasing the only witness who could contradict the official narrative. Wells was arrested on a Tuesday morning. Perp walked past cameras that broadcast his shame to every news network in the country. 3 other officers were implicated. 2 resigned. 1 faced court-martial. Colonel Ashworth was fully exonerated. The charges were dismissed with prejudice, his record expunged, his reputation restored. He had called Cordero the day the verdict came down, his voice thick with emotion. "I do not know how to thank you," Ashworth had said. "You already did," Cordero replied. 6 years ago, on a mountain in Syria. We are even now, but they were not even. They were something more than even. They were connected in a way that transcended rank and protocol and the ordinary bonds between soldiers. Ashworth had saved Cordero's life with his hands. Cordero had saved Ashworth's life with his voice. The debt between them was not a weight to be measured. It was a bridge to be crossed. They met for coffee every Thursday now. A diner in Alexandria where the waitress knew their orders and the cook was a Vietnam veteran who never charged them full price. They talked about the investigation, about the news coverage, about the letters that arrived daily from veterans across the country who had seen Cordero's testimony and found the courage to tell their own stories. But mostly they talked about healing, about the slow, painful work of putting broken pieces back together, about the days when getting out of bed felt impossible and the days when the sun seemed brighter than it had any right to be. Cordero had finally contacted Adiz Okonkwo, Raymond's sister. She had flown to Washington the week after the trial, and they had sat together in a coffee shop for 7 hours while Cordero told her everything. Raymond's courage, Raymond's jokes, Raymond's steady voice in the chaos, Raymond's last words. She had cried. He had cried. And when it was over, she had given him something he did not expect. A letter. Raymond had written it before the deployment, as soldiers sometimes did, a message to be delivered if the worst happened. In it, Raymond had written about his team sergeant, call sign Spectre, about the man who always put his soldiers first, about how if anything happened, his sister should know that it was not Cordero's fault. War does not care about fault, Raymond had written. It takes who it takes. If you're reading this, it means it took me. But it also means Spectre did everything he could. He always does. Tell him that for me. Tell him to stop blaming himself and start living again. Cordero had read that letter 47 times. He kept it in his pocket now, next to the photograph of his team. Raymond's voice reaching across death to absolve him one more time. He was not healed. He knew that. The nightmare still came. The guilt still whispered in dark hours before dawn. But he was healing, and that was something he had not believed possible 3 months ago. The sun cleared the horizon, flooding his apartment with light. Cordero turned from the window and picked up his jacket. Not the torn surplus coat held together with safety pins, but a new jacket, simple and clean, given to him by a veterans organization that had read about his testimony. He had somewhere to be. The peer counseling group met every Saturday morning in a church basement in Falls Church. 12 veterans sitting in a circle sharing stories that civilians would never understand. Cordero had started attending 6 weeks ago. He had not spoken for the first 4 sessions, just listened, just let himself exist in a space where no one expected anything from him. But last week he had raised his hand. "My name is Elias," he had said. "Call sign was Spectre. And I lost my best friend because the intelligence was wrong and the universe is not fair." It was not much. It was everything. Today, he would say more. Today, he would tell them about Raymond, about Syria, about 6 years of running from help he did not believe he deserved. And maybe, somewhere in that church basement, another veteran would hear his story and realize they were not alone. That was the mission now. Not extraction, not elimination, just presence, just showing up, just proving that survival was possible, that healing was possible, that the darkness did not have to win. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that truth has power and that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, please consider subscribing to our channel. And right now on your screen, you will see another incredible story waiting for you. Click it, watch it, and remember that every person you pass on the street has a story. Some of them might just be legendary. Thank you for watching. Cordero locked his apartment door and walked toward the elevator. The hallway was quiet. The building was waking up slowly around him, lives unfolding behind closed doors, stories he would never know. He thought about Raymond. He thought about Ashworth. He thought about the mother of Sergeant Kim, who had written him a letter thanking him for telling her what happened to her son. He thought about truth and how heavy it could be and how much lighter he felt now that he had finally set it down. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside. The ground floor button glowed when he pressed it. "Still here, brother," he whispered to the empty elevator. "Still trying. And for the first time in 6 years, I think I might actually make it." The doors closed. The elevator descended. And Elias Cordero, the ghost who refused to stay dead, went out to help others find their way back to the living.